Welcome to Talking Digital Academy, the audio format for the Digital Academy organized by the Digital History Department at Bielefeld University. My name is Silke Schwandt. I'm a professor of digital history at Bielefeld, and I am your host for this episode of our podcast. The Digital Academy is an annual online workshop with changing topics from the field of digital humanities. In 2023, the Academy took place under the topic From Uncertainty to Action and focused on phenomena of uncertainty in data-driven research. For a deeper dive into these phenomena, we had a special expert panel during our Open Space Day. This day's expert interviews form the basis for the 3 podcast episodes on this channel. This is the second episode with Professor Michael Piotrowski from the University of Lausanne as my guest. Michael Piotrowski is Associate Professor for Digital Humanities at the University of Lausanne, and before that he was co-director of the Laboratory of Digital Humanities and Cultures at the University of Lausanne, and his academic research focuses on knowledge representation and formal modeling in the humanities and on language technology for historical text. This means he's an expert on how to actually deal with all these pitfalls, challenges and uncertainties in a sort of formal modeling way. The possibilities of facing uncertainty with digital methods and the acceptance of uncertainty as an unavoidable treasure, almost like a positive value of research in the humanities, and how to deal with this gap of trying to get rid of uncertainty in formal modeling while retaining the value of uncertainty, ambiguity and vagueness is central to his research. So thank you, Michael, for being here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I will start with a question that is not maybe primarily related to uncertainty to just sort of get our conversation going. And we'll start with the question, what kind of data are you actually dealing with in your research? And how do you interact methodologically with that data or the data sets that you are interested in?
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's a great honor to be here. Yeah. Well, actually, these days I mostly excuse me for looking over to that side, checking the audio levels because the microphone is quite sensitive. It's like, okay. So these days I'm really mostly interested in the epistemology and theoretical questions. So I don't have in many cases, and also I should perhaps mention that I'm not a historian. I only play one on TV, and so yes, many people have a concrete motivation. So this project, and now I'm interested in these theoretical questions. I currently don't have my current projects are really dealing with these epistemological questions, but of course there is background working with, as you mentioned, historical text, for example, that raises many questions of uncertainty. So especially, but not only in the context of digital editions. So starting from just identifying the shapes that you see on that page to what was the meaning of a certain word or of the whole document. So and that is kind of a background for the theoretical work that I'm doing now or trying to do now.
So it's basically the uncertainty on the page, sort of questions of layout or identification, transcription, that kind of brought you to that particular question of how to deal with it, but also the question of, are we asked to reduce it as much as possible, or is there even a possibility to sort of use it more productively?
Yeah, right. Yes, text is one thing, and I used to work for the Swiss Law Sources Foundation, which is the large-scale edition project. But also there we were confronted with these issues. What do we do with uncertain interpretations, which have, I think there it's quite clear that this is something. I mean, editing has a long tradition of making uncertainty explicit in footnotes, for example, reading uncertain or something to that extent. But and then I worked at the Leibniz Institute for European History in Mainz with a wide variety of projects and historians researching all kinds of things and all kinds of studying all kinds of questions and working with all kinds of data. For example, another good example is, I think, a geographical data, in the widest sense. What does it mean when we refer to some historical state? And as further back you go, can you that the question, can we actually talk about states in the Middle Ages, in the sense of the modern nation state? Well, no, but on the other hand, these kinds of things, and what I found striking was, especially here, a certain disconnect between historical research is done traditionally, where everybody, all historians know that it's for this purpose, and everybody knows that it's not precise, and so on and so forth. And then when it goes into the digital sphere and can be processed automatically, this common knowledge of everything is kind of has a certain, there are certain caveats attached to it, but they are no longer attached to in the digital form, in the data, and that is kind of the big issue, I think.
Now, maybe we can stay with that big issue for just a moment. And although it is always difficult to differentiate between doing research the traditional or analog way and then doing it digitally, I think it's more like a gradual difference there than two really clear, discrete opposites. But would you say? Could you maybe elaborate on your last point a little bit more? So what is the difference in uncertainty, maybe also epistemologically or theoretically, when you think about how you deal with it digitally and how you try to formalize it, and then how we would traditionally, me being a historian, sort of deal with that kind of uncertainty as also a sort of productive or force, or maybe something that everybody knows about, but we try to be as plausible and as reflected as possible with our interpretations. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that? And also, we could also go to sort of questions of generalization, or what is formalizable, if that is an English term, for humanities research, and what is sort of not, and how would you solve that particular problem?
Yeah, clearly there is. It's not a dichotomy. Here is traditional research in history, and here is digital research in history, and in parentheses, perhaps, what does this even mean? Especially, but the thing is, maybe traditionally there is at least among, let's say, professional historians, there is a common understanding that all the sources have limitations. Let's put it that in a really neutral way, and these limitations can be something that is something relatively neutral. Of course, all sources have a limited scope. Perhaps they don't talk about everything, but they talk about something specific. So if you have this, contract from that monastery in that place from roughly around that date, well, it can't talk about something that happened later. It probably can't say a lot about something that happened somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So there are these kind of these limitations, and of course this all goes on to up to the forgery, to where it's simply it's a fabrication, it's completely unreliable, so on, and everything is kind of between these things, these two extremes, and everybody, well, all professional historians, put it that way, card-carrying historians, are aware of these limitations, and take them into account when they are constructing their narratives. And there is, unfortunately, and perhaps one limitation to traditional, well, that is kind of a strength, obviously a strength of historical research and actual historians doing the research, that they are aware of that. It comes with it's something that is, and this, yeah, on the other hand, it's something that is so ingrained in historical practice that it's that is very often not made explicit, and unfortunately there is a little bit of research on theory of history, but not very much. And it's quite funny as a non-historian, if you're talking to me, that happened to me a lot in Mainz at the IEG. You're talking to historians in a variety of settings, and they basically tell you, well, only historians can do what historians can do because only they have the training and the skills and so on necessary. But then, as a kind of outside observer, you see that, well, there is not really that much. I mean, it's kind of intuitive what's going on there. There is not that much explicit reflection on these epistemological questions. And I would never is exaggerated, but hardly ever met a historian who's really interested in the epistemological questions of historical research. So so we have these sources, and then we have the narrative. What happens in between? Well, skills, bro. I don't know. But that is not necessarily. I mean, this does not necessarily have a negative impact on the product, of course. I mean, it's like with the crafts. I mean, craftsmen don't necessarily have to reflect on their practices on a theoretical level in order to build a good cabinet or whatever. So that's not necessarily the problem here. But then we have the and then we have, but in the if we go digital and really in a general way, many of these we have something. We have machines dealing with the sources in some way. No longer just humans, but machines. Some of the work, and the scope of that can of course differ, but some of the work is delegated to machines. And also there we have a kind of continuum. Of course, you can, in many cases, and what has traditionally been the first probably was that purely mechanical work is delegated to the machine. Counting, for example, counting things, counting occurrences of something in some text. It's actually not, again in parentheses, it's not counting is not as unproblematic as it may seem, but let's say you identify certain things and then you let the machine count it or sort it, or of course compare two versions of a text and these kinds of things that are really mechanical, and so there's no interpretation going on. But of course, as the more you advance and the more processing you of these automatic processing or computational processing of the sources that you do, the more interpretation goes into that, and the more of the interpretative work is delegated to the machine. And here it becomes a problem, because the machine obviously does not have the knowledge and the attitude or the competencies of a human historian. And then this happens quite easily. I mean, then you have you start with some vague description of some property of some monastery. Some monastery claims that it has in some village, and so on and so forth. And then it becomes, and at some point it becomes geographic coordinates that are on the map, and that can be processed in all kinds of way, and offers cool visualizations and further processing can be used in different contexts, and so on and so forth. And suddenly this vague description that has been interpreted by a historian at some point and put into relation to the actual world, and then was transformed into machine processable data, is kind of like, oh yeah, this is the exact point where it was, and it most certainly it wasn't. So I think this is one of the main aspects where where we really have not just kind of to quote Marx, the Umschlag von Quantität in Qualität, so the shift from quantity, just processing large amounts of data in a mechanical way, suddenly becomes something qualitatively different. And I think that's really where the challenge is.
So if I understand that correctly, you would say that, or would you maybe say, to phrase it as a question, that this shift from quantity to quality, or sort of the processes that you described, they, like working with machines or algorithmic analyses or whatever, does that add to the uncertainty of the researcher? And if so, what are the respects that sort of add new ways or new uncertainties in our research processes? Of course, the reducing an interpretation to a set of geo-coordinates kind of feels more certain, but then it isn't. So what are the kinds of uncertainty that you sort of are added when you work with that kind of with these kinds of tools and methods?
Yeah. Yes, I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, there is some uncertain. I mean, without defining what exactly we mean by that, but some uncertainty intuitively goes away, because now we have exact coordinates. But on the other hand, other layers of uncertainty are being added, because, for example, the genesis of these coordinates has been lost, and it's not documented. I mean, we have these coordinates, and then of course you can do a quick check and say, oh yeah. I mean, reading the text, it mentions that village here, and I mean, with some, I mean, if it's a medieval text, I mean, it's really like, oh yeah, that place name looks like this modern place name, so, and it's kind of near of this monastery, and so yeah, probably he was probably right, but well, is that? But yeah, how exactly did the people who created the data arrive at the conclusion that it's there, and what is the? I mean, now given, for example, a concrete example would be if you just have point coordinates, then that automatically raises the question: well, what's the extent of this of this property? It's probably not this point, which is really a point in the mathematical sense, so it has no extent. It's somewhere in the center of this. Probably of this property there, but what's the extent? What are the boundaries, and so on and so forth, and then is it like up to the river, or what is it? And so that is that would be a good example, I think, of new uncertainty. The main issue is, of course, how was this data produced, and what are the what's the interpretation that went in there, and but also then, of course, as an example of new uncertainty would be the extent of the of a property that is represented by one point. And perhaps, and then the other thing is, in some sense, I mean, these kinds of things are now being discussed quite frequently. I mean, compared to some years ago, see in digital humanities in general a bit more awareness of these issues, even though, let's say awareness. I think that's it, and that, but that is really mostly, well, that really concerns what I call historical uncertainty. This case, meaning, I mean, we don't know the exact location in that example. But obviously, I mean, yes, if that monastery had a plot of land somewhere there, as it's described in this charter, well, it had to be somewhere. It's just that we don't know the location. But something that is that's even more important, I think, is, and which tends to be overlooked, is what I call historiographical uncertainty. Namely, the uncertainty that relates to the construction of the narrative, the historical narrative, which is, of course, based on the historical facts, like locations, people, names, events described, and so on. But go far beyond that in creating, and that's basically what a historical narrative does, creating causal or constructing causal relationships between these things. So the Pope did this, and then the king did that, and in reaction to, here we are confronted with uncertainty. Well, here we have, on the one hand, as said in the, I mean, here we have a productive. On the one hand, we have a productive tension there, because as I argued, is that only because we don't know everything about the past can we write history. So history is not the same as the past. History is the narrative that we construct. I mean, the how we make sense of what we know of the past, and that, of course, is a if we knew everything, there would be no need for history. I mean, especially if we knew all the causal relations between why things happened and so on, there would be no need for that. And so but we don't, and so we need to make up stories, and we can call them narratives. That sounds a bit more professional, but they are stories, and they respond to the same the innate human desire for or need for explanations in order to reduce uncertainty. In the end, to know that so this happened because that happened, and then this makes sense. So yes, so there is this I don't know. I'll stop here. Perhaps I don't know where this is going. I think going beyond your original question already.
Never mind. You give me lots of opportunity to sort of ask something else in relation to your answers. I was going to ask for definitions of uncertainty, but maybe we're not going to go there because you already gave us sort of the historiographical uncertainty is one of the examples how to frame the object that we try to discuss. Of course, there's lots of other fields, types, kinds of uncertainty that we could address, but maybe we stay with that for a little bit because as I know from your work, this is sort of one of your central topics at the moment, also to how to bring historians to the point to reflect upon that particular uncertainty, but also think about ways to tackle that. And one of your main suggestions is to think about modeling and the way how history also sort of deals with models, or maybe even is a model. From my own experience, I know that most of my colleagues in history, they don't really use that term very frequently. There's no sort of concept of modeling really in the discipline. Although I agree with you that lots of things that we do kind of feel like modeling. So maybe you can help us a little bit to sort of think about our topic from uncertainty to action and think a little bit about the modeling part of your research. And maybe that could even be something that would help us to deal with uncertainty. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So maybe one, of course, one could go on for a long time about this topic, but maybe so what we really have in both in actually in everyday life and in science in the sense in the sciences in the sense of Wissenschaft, so natural science and human science as well, is a configuration that I've called modeling triad. So we have some phenomenon that we're interested in, and in many cases this phenomenon is not, well, this depends a bit on your philosophical standpoint, but from a slightly constructivist, in the best case we have some perception of the phenomenon, but this is not this is no direct access, but we can see it. But in many cases, the phenomenon that we are interested in is not directly accessible to us at all. And well, this applies both to, stars in some galaxy that we can't touch, we can't manipulate them, and we can only perceive them indirectly using instruments, scientific, astronomical instruments, and so on and so forth. And this also goes for history. What happened in the past is gone. The people are dead. The places are maybe gone, have maybe gone as well, and there is no way to anymore to access this. And so we can't study the phenomenon itself. So we have to, what we do in order to study it, we need to construct a model of the phenomenon. And of course, that is a kind of we go in with it's not just a mapping. It's not just taking taking a picture of the phenomenon and then looking at this, because we don't have access to this to the original, so we can't just map it to something else. So there obviously is, in the construction of the model, we're using what's the term used in the English translation of, like what Gadamer calls the Vorurteil. So the
Presumption or prejudice or
prejudice, but in this technical sense of hypothesis. We could call it hypothesis, perhaps. For example, like, oh well, so we don't know anything about this phenomenon that we want to study, but I believe that it is kind of analogous to something that we know. And that, of course, is a typical approach to postulate some analogy between the original, the phenomenon under study, and something else that we know, and that kind of motivates the construction of a model in a certain way. And then what goes on, what happens afterwards? So here, obviously, we already have a lot of uncertainty in there because, well, we don't know the original. So the construction of our model there's lots of uncertainty in that. And of course, it's not, I mean, this is a simplification here. It's not a one-shot thing, but typically it's a kind of a recursive or iterative process. But whatever, I mean, then when we have the model, then what we do is we study the model. And that, of course, can be done in various ways, and it depends on the type of model and the properties of the model and the operations that the model allows. And of course, if we have a wooden mechanical model that allows that's different from my idea of the Middle Ages. I mean, that is a model. Yeah. I mean, like, there were these kings, and I mean, the kings did this, and then in reaction to, and there were the peasants, and so this establishes. I mean, this also as an example of the huge variety of models that we have, but which have, most of them are really about interested in causal relations. So we put certain elements into relation to each other. So we postulate that there is some entity that we call the king, or the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and then we say, and then we have other entities which we call electors, that had certain roles that I postulate, and they interact in a certain way, and that leads to certain events. And of course, then we can see whether this model of, in this case, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the electors, and maybe other entities, allow us to create plausible explanations for certain events that we know that happened. I mean, so that part of history is rich of, I mean, you have these Wahlkapitulation, for example, so these concessions made by the guy who wanted to be elected emperor, and so on and so forth. And so you have these negotiations, and we say, so we have this power structure, for example, that could be one part of the model, and so that explains why this happened. But of course, what we are doing is we don't look at the actual past, but we look at the model of that of the past that we have here. And so by studying this, the model, we obtain insights, and that is the third part. So we get results from this, some results from this study, and of course the form of the results again depends on the type of model and the type of methods we use with the model and the kind of manipulations that we use with the that we do on the model. But we get some insights. Mm-hmm. And then the last part of this triad is the application of these insights gained from studying the model to the original phenomenon. And that is, I completely admit that I don't have a good description of that yet. I mean, we find this in all disciplines, and of course, in disciplines that work with prediction, natural sciences or engineering or so on, the application is straightforward. So, for example, if you're a civil engineer and you create a model of a bridge that you want to construct, and you calculate the strength, and then and you get some results and say, oh, so the bridge has to have these properties, and then you apply that to the reality and build the bridge. Well, that is a straightforward application. So in history, of course, we don't have this kind of straightforward application where we say, okay, so, but it's something more like, obviously, something, I mean, kind of the popular notion of learning from history. That is something you could, of course, there are, perhaps more concrete applications to, like policy consulting and these kinds of things. But I think that these are relatively special cases, and the application of the model to the phenomenon is really just one iteration, a kind of hermeneutic circle, and say, oh, okay, now I have a better understanding of what happened, and I'll what happened there, and I'll take this as a snapshot, and then somebody else can, or later on I can work to refine it, perhaps in another iteration, or someone else can build upon it, and so you could, in some way, you could say the perhaps the written narrative in the form of the historical book is kind of the application of the model to the phenomenon under study, because it's not the same as the model. It's just a reflection of that model. But yeah, so it's a bit hard to describe what's going on, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. But of course, nevertheless, you say, oh, so something happened in the past, and now I studied the model, and now I have a better understanding of the past. Or one could, of course, debate of whether you're just convincing yourself that this is what actually happened. And I think even professional historians often fall into the trap of confusing the map and the territory. The past and history and the past. But so that is the. And so you see, well, yeah, the model plays a central. I mean, we're only constructing models. I mean, we could do this. We could shorten this and say we only construct models all time and all the time, and we only have limited information, and so everything is uncertain, and everything is basically constructed. But yeah.
But it's obviously not that easy to just sort of leave that out there. Thank you very much for that very elaborate attempt to sort of focus on the modeling or on the model. Thank you very much, Michael. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for having me.